Hey everybody, it's been a little while, hasn't it? It's great to see everybody. I just wanted to tune in with you guys and just say I'm going to come at this from a different angle from now on, my videos and so on. I've been working full-time, more than full-time. I thought this would be a little bit of a new format. I'm speaking more extemporaneously. I'm presently working. I get lulls in my work and so on, and so I can do little vlog-style videos. Anyway, I wanted to tell you about this book that I've been reading and listening to on Audible. It's called A Good War by Seth Klein. The subtitle is Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. Now, Seth Klein, I'll just read the back here. Seth Klein was the founding British Columbia director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives for over 2 decades and has been immersed in climate change and inequality issues for his working life. He is currently an adjunct professor in urban studies at Simon Fraser University and remains a research associate with the CCPA. He lives in Vancouver, BC. So a fellow British Columbian and really intelligent guy. You may actually recognize the last name, as he is brother of the arguably more popular, more well-known Naomi Klein. So stay tuned. Oh, I should tell you, just as a little bit of promotion for this guy, because it's such a great book. On Audible, this is actually included with your subscription. You don't even have to use a credit. You can really tell that his heart is in this. You know, it's he really is looking at this situation as the emergency it is. Now, he's likening approaching climate change as a war. Climate change really is the Third World War. It's going to involve that level of commitment and cooperation across countries, but he's speaking more specifically from the perspective of Canada and how Canada unified and worked together in the fight against fascism during the Second World War, and saying we can implement similar initiatives and similar methods in adjudicating this problem, treating it like a proper crisis that it is. And to be clear, because I did have my backup as soon as I saw, the war message behind something that is, distinctly social, distinctly economic and environmental. You don't directly relate that to an aggression, or the enemy isn't exactly obvious. We should be careful against any calls to action and violence, right? So I immediately sort of had my backup, like, what's he getting at? Why are we referring it to a war? He states right at the outset that he has been a long-time proponent of peace activism. He's against war. He, and I consider myself as well, not a pacifist. He's not a pacifist. There are situations, and I think, Second World War is a good example, where action is necessary. Violence is, to a certain extent, necessary. We've often heard as the Second World War is a good war. And, while I'm leery of using that expression, in a narrow sense, it's true. The spread of fascism needed to be opposed. Doesn't mean that you have to condone exactly how we did it, but it did need to be stopped. Right? And so his main point here, in fact, the reason why he's a Canadian, is I think it was his father, he says in the preface, his father was conscripted into the American war against Vietnam. His family left on the grounds that they were opposing this immoral war. They fundamentally disagreed with it and didn't liken it to, the spread of fascism, which was something worth resisting. So right off the bat, that put my mind at ease. I really liked that he denounced war for what it was. But we really should approach climate change, the climate emergency, as the crisis it is. Either it is a crisis or it isn't. What we need to do is we need to come together, unify a common cause, and oppose this existential threat the way we opposed fascism in the Second World War. And there's many, many parallels. All right, guys, I'm back. I want to share you this quote. Listen to this.
William Rees, an ecological economist, professor emeritus at the University of British Columbia and creator of the ecological footprint concept, has said, "The ecologically necessary is politically infeasible, but the politically feasible is ecologically irrelevant."
This is already what's so powerful about this book. This is straight from the preface, is so often this climate action, climate emergency is being presented as, it's a nice little hobby that we should sort of do on the side. It's not really an emergency, even though all the science is on the side of climate activists. But if you toot that horn too much, if you amplify that too much, you're just not going to get elected. And if you are elected, you're certainly not going to run very far with it. Well, that is the wrong friggin' way of looking at it. Because, as William Rees says, the politically infeasible is irrelevant in this case. Because there isn't going to be a politic in the mass, potential extinction of the human race, first of all, but in societies that fail. Business cannot flourish in societies that fail. Okay, this is Bill McGibbon. Listen to this. This is still from the preface.
But as the great climate change warrior and founder of 350.org, Bill McGibbon, has said, "Winning slowly on climate change is just another way of losing. Politics might be all about compromise and the art of the possible, but there is no bargaining with the laws of nature, and nature is now telling us something fierce. And so, a new approach is needed."
When fascism was spreading, for a time, it was politically infeasible to oppose fascism. Certainly to the business elites. They didn't want to oppose fascism. It's costly to wage a war. When you're opposing a huge crisis like an expansionary power as fascism, can you really afford to look at that situation from a political lens? All right, guys, talk about speaking truth to power. Listen to this right here.
Fighting the climate crisis isn't some elite-driven concern, as it is sometimes portrayed. It is our collective moral responsibility, and blocking effective and meaningful climate action is the work of scoundrels, irresponsible and cynical political and economic interests who would do harm to the well-being of our children and grandchildren. Those who sow the seeds of climate denial and doubt and who block progress on climate action must be opposed or ignored, just like we did in the Second World War. Taking action doesn't require everyone's agreement, nor can we wait for universal agreement when faced with an emergency.
Scoundrels. This crisis is greater in magnitude than the Holocaust. Now, sure, it's not as discriminatory, perhaps, you could argue. There are differences. I'm not one to make absolute statements of that sort. But it is a kind of Holocaust. It is something that we will look back on, and we will say that the people who denied the science and who funded the bullshit are scoundrels. Maybe that shouldn't be outlawed. That's a whole other discussion surrounding freedom of speech and so on. But we should shout it down. The voices of reason need to fucking assert themselves. All right, so climate change activists are often referred to, as I mentioned earlier, they're seen as radicals, and the messaging is largely alarmist. Well, alarmist because it is warranting alarm. Listen to this end note. This is really neat.
Our mainstream media takeaways of most of these events are of destruction and chaos, but as Solnit notes, in the wake of an earthquake, a bombing, or a major storm, most people are altruistic, urgently engaged in caring for themselves and those around them, strangers and neighbors as well as friends and loved ones. The image of the selfish, panicky, or regressively savage human being in times of disaster has little truth to it. Decades of meticulous sociological research on behavior in disasters, from the bombings of World War II to floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, and storms across the continent and around the world, have demonstrated this. Horrible in itself, disaster is sometimes the door back into paradise, the paradise at least in which we are who we hope to be.
It's the road back into paradise. I mean, you can't be too idealistic about this. Alarmism can be destructive because it promotes panic, and that's not how we should address this issue. I'm not saying that treating it and dignifying it as a crisis does not imply panic. And most of history's great emergencies, tragedies, have, on the bright side, been a call to our better angels. And that's how we have to treat climate change. All right, good morning, folks. It's a new day. So, Seth Klein made a really, really good point. Just, I can't remember which chapter this was in now, but he was saying about climate change or climate activism that unlike most forms of activism, such as, the civil rights for African Americans, the suffragette movement, or even in more recent years like marriage equality and anti-discrimination laws which protect LGBTQ. He says, unlike those really, really hard battles which took decades and decades to gain status for these individuals, status on a legal level, what's kind of good news about the environmental activism is we don't really need to set any new precedents. I mean, there are some. We don't need to set any new precedents. We already have something extremely convenient that we can append or connect to our cause, and that is Indigenous title and rights. Their territorial rights and freedoms are extremely important in this battle. Most Indigenous folks do support climate action. They're one of the ones at the forefront fighting for this cause, in fact. And so what Seth Klein argues, I would say very forcefully, is that we need to enjoin our fight together. All right, guys, listen to this.
While we are all currently reliant on fossil fuels, all complicit in some way given the economy in which we live, we are not all the enemy in this fight. Naomi Oreskes, Harvard professor of the history of science, notes that during the U.S. Civil War and the battle against slavery, people in the North wore clothes made of cotton picked by slaves, but that did not make them hypocrites when they joined the abolition movement. It just meant that they were also part of the slave economy and they knew it. That is why they acted to change the system, not just their clothes.
I'm humored, especially with the turn that the dialogue has taken on social media concerning climate change activism. You know, we hear of all kinds of accusations of hypocrisy. We hear people like Jason Kenney point to the Davos men as, you know, just the biggest freaking hypocritical billionaires on the planet. You know, the World Economic Forum getting together, and or you hear about people say Leonardo DiCaprio with his private yacht. Excuse me. You know, when it comes to Greta Thunberg, for example, who I'm not really a fan of, but remember when she took her sailboat around the world? I can't remember what the event was. I think she was headed to some sort of summit herself, and she was sort of, you know, bragging that, you know, I took my sailboat, I didn't release any fossil fuels, and everybody jumped on that, and they were like, you know, all of the materials that went into your constructing your boat were, you know, directly or indirectly using fossil fuels. I mean, and that's true. You know, plastics, the varathane, or like the paints, the fasteners, you know, even the manufacturing of the canvas of the sail, for heaven's sakes, in today's economy, is fired by fossil fuels. What else? I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but I want to mention all these things. For example, I'm driving an electric vehicle right now, and while the BC grid, I believe, is all 100% hydro, I don't know if there's any coal that goes into it. I suppose that there probably is some coal or some form of fossil fuels driving that electricity when I go to a charge point, right? Or when I plug it into my garage. You know, and you see all these memes on Facebook of conservatives saying, you know, just watching another fossil fuel driven electric vehicle, you know, and I mean, they're not entirely wrong. What are some other examples? I was thinking of Barack Obama, and this is where it becomes very insidious, actually, as he was saying in his memoir of his tenure, which I just read recently, that he felt like a hypocrite because it's like, here he is, he's got his own battles. This was not at the time his biggest priority. With, you know, I mean, he was focused on healthcare and Republican obstruction of the economic stimulus package and so on. And he said, you know, here I am, I'm taking time I don't really have to go on this trip to Copenhagen and lecture the world on their consumption of fossil fuels when I've got the largest goddamn carbon footprint on this planet. You know, and even Ban Ki-moon mentioned in his memoir, which I read about a year ago, he said when he first started to tackle some of these big climate-related initiatives, one of the things that he wanted to bring down was their use of paper, because the UN creates a mound of paper every day. I think he said that the United Nations all around the world, they calculated all the paper, and they said every year they generated a stack as high as the UN building in New York. So he's like, you know, even well-intentioned people feel like we're fucking hypocrites here, you know, telling the world how to live. But, and I could list so many other examples of quote unquote hypocrisy here, and I disagree with that quote slightly. It is hypocrisy. You have to admit it. It is hypocrisy. But the general point that professor made, that Seth Klein was quoting, is spot on. Abolitionists during the Civil War wore slave-picked cotton. What is your fucking point? What we need, so what? Are we supposed to simply remove ourselves from this battle because we're all directly or indirectly indicted? No. We, you know, people who have a voice, who have a megaphone, like the President of the United States, like Ban Ki-moon, like all the people in the World Economic Forum, or even people, lesser figures like Leonardo DiCaprio, they have a megaphone. They should use it. I've often fought with this in my own mind, like, you know, because I do interact with people quite a lot online, And it's not been something I exactly know how to say, something quippy and tight and concise, how to respond to that charge of hypocrisy. Well, now I do. Abolitionists in the Civil War wore slave pick cotton. What is your fucking point? I love this quote by Kim Campbell. Listen to this. This is brilliant.
More and more people are seeing these parallels. On August 3rd, 2019, in response to news that a federal court judge in the U.S. had found against oil companies for beclouding the scientific evidence to prevent climate action, none other than former conservative Prime Minister Kim Campbell tweeted, "This is precisely why I have said that the oil companies have committed crimes against humanity. All the factors are there: knowledge of the truth and deliberate action to conceal or becloud the truth to save their profits while preparing to protect themselves. Nuremberg worthy."
Not good. Okay, guys, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time and talk about, I would say this is Seth Klein's central analog or parallel to the Second World War. He refers to a brilliant man that was enlisted to head up this effort. His name was C.D. Howe. He immediately recognized, okay, we need ships, we need aircraft, we need ammunition, we need armaments, we need tanks, we need light infantry, light military vehicles. We need to rethink the agricultural farming industry because there was rationing, right? There were all these things that needed to come online like that. And so what did he do? Well, he opened up what are called crown corporations. Now, just for clarification, the Canada's central bank is a crown corporation. That's an example of a crown corporation. And what it is effectively is it is Canada's, the Canadian government's personal bank. Well, likewise, if you're going to build some ships, if you're going to make some tanks, these were corporations. They were the government's business. And they immediately were formed, and not just like one or two or three of them. He opened up dozens of these crown corporations. And even the United States has something like this. They likely don't call it a crown corporation. I mean, for example, the Federal Reserve is the U.S. central bank, right? So I don't know exactly what they would call it, but it's something, same sort of principle, right? And what did it do? Well, the first thing that it did is it didn't encourage private industry to, if you're okay with it, if you're okay with ramping up, going from making 2 ships per year to like 200 or 400, which is what I think they made, like something like 400 destroyers in Canada by the end of the war, if I'm not mistaken on that figure. They didn't enlist or wait for the private industry to fill that void. They immediately started to produce all of this stuff, and it had many intended and unintended consequences. First of all, it stimulated the economy in a big way. I mean, we have never seen a transfer of wealth such as what happened during the Second World War, and the greatest transfer of wealth to the baby boom generation. And so we weren't handcuffed to this fucking nonsensical ideology of free markets. The government took the reins and said, we need all of this infrastructure, not tomorrow, not in a month from now, not in a year from now. We need it yesterday. And so we're going to enlist, we're going to open up all these crown corporations. And the second consequence, other than economic stimulation, it also stimulated the corporations themselves to compete with the government. And the government was more than happy to do that. In fact, what they did even more than that is they enlisted what were called $1-a-year men. And they worked directly with C.D. Howe, and these were men, I gather they were basically the C-suite of Canada's best performing and profitable corporations, and they got these $1-a-year men to participate with C.D. Howe and to bring all of their talents and their ingenuity of running private industry into running these crown corporations. And it immediately stimulated production across the economy. They mandated that private industry, if they were, making a tank, if they were making a car, if they were making a gun, that they couldn't profit, I think, more than 5 to 10%. Of course, it was also very equitable. They said that after wartime production, you could receive more, like up to 20%, I believe, in profits after the war had been successfully fought. And of course their supplies were all covered. And it's like, we need to, if we're going to do this similarly, if we're going to remake our economy, which is absolutely necessary, if we're going to rise to this challenge of the climate emergency, then we have to start thinking in those terms. We can't be ideological about this. We can't look at how can we incrementally stimulate the economy and private industry and get them all on board? No. That can work. It can work to some degree. Tesla is a very good example of this. It did work to some degree, but let's not even forget, in the case of Tesla in recent years, he was a huge beneficiary of Obama's economic stimulus. And in fact, wind turbines and solar energy would be all but non-existent to this very day had Obama not invested in that industry. And Tesla was one of those upstarts that greatly benefited from Obama Keynesian style economics. So I fulsomely reject this idea that we need to appeal to corporations. That is a religion. It is a pure superstition. We have done this before. We have remade our economy. We did it in World War II. And not only that, we transitioned the economy back to private industry afterwards. And we did it in the pandemic. We did the exact same thing. Why aren't we doing it with climate change? So this is another really good point that Seth Klein brings up, is just on the front of messaging on the climate emergency and laying blame, how certainly the media and even individuals like us, when we're just in regular conversation, to keep in the back of our minds. Listen to this. It was a good point.
The Narratives Project also warns climate campaign messaging that blames the fossil fuel industry closes down the conversation. Many of those who might share concerns about climate change feel that they too are being attacked. This speaks to the industry's capture of Alberta's political culture. It remains my contention, however, that the climate emergency requires that we confront the oil and gas industry, the corporations who have actively blocked progress on climate. The key, therefore, is to carefully and consistently distinguish between the corporations and its workers, and to ensure that those employed in the sector do not feel under attack.
Now that is important. I, for instance, have many friends and family that are directly and indirectly employed by the fossil fuel industry. For example, I have many relatives in Alberta, and Alberta is the entire economy is predicated on how well oil is doing. I think it employs something like 30% of the labor force in Alberta. And now you think all the trickle down, how the person who works in Fort McMurray builds a house, that employs all of the the construction workers, and how all of that works, right? So oil is important to that group, and you need to do as he says. You need to distinguish between what the oil corporations have done, and also make it clear, like point to them, because most of these people have a horror story themselves in their career with these oil companies. They've been laid off at least once, unless they just got into the industry or something, right? But that's true, they should be able to identify with this. It's really, these oil giants are really corrupt, and it shouldn't be hard to convince them of that. Another thing that I was thinking is how often are people quick to say, fuck Trudeau? We see all of this enmity towards Trudeau, and lots of it he comes by quite honestly, but they're mostly upset with this 11-cent carbon tax. I mean, he's bumped it up a few times since 2017, when he brought it on board, and it's gone up by like 2-3 cents every year, every couple of years, and now it represents 11 cents a liter. I mean, gas has jumped from, in the past 6 months, well, actually this was more like in the past 2 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, it went from like $2.38 in Victoria for regular gas to $1.38 per liter, $1.38 per liter, immediately up to $2.15. I mean, that's 78 cents. Why are you getting upset with Justin Trudeau's 11 cent carbon pricing? This is what I don't get, is like, there's many reasons not to like Justin Trudeau. Trust me, I'm among them. I don't really like the guy. But keep your vitriol proportional here. The people you should be outraged against are the oil giants. So I really liked this book. I would say a couple of points that I think could have been done better. I don't particularly like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't really like Greta Thunberg. I think that they're personality cults. And while I certainly put AOC in a different category than Greta Thunberg, and I respect some of the policies that she wants to bring on board, like the Green New Deal. Seth Klein went into quite a bit of detail about the Green New Deal, and I think that would be a wonderful thing to advance. I just felt that there was a little bit, I don't know, too much maybe name dropping or whatever, or, I'm not crazy about AOC. I think that she's an ideologue in many ways, and while she is a talented politician, I mean, everybody has something that you can say good about. I think that we should get away from the personality thing. Like this is one of the main issues I've had with Republicans, is that it's become a personality cult, and I don't want the left to do that. One of the great things about putting Biden in office is nobody really wanted him in office. It was that we all wanted Trump to leave. That was why Biden got into office. Nobody's really crazy and smitten with Biden. So yeah, I don't want this to become about personality. We got work to do with the climate, and let's keep it to that. Let's keep the ego and the personality at bay. It's AOC is not going to bail us out. Bernie Sanders is not going to bail us out of the climate emergency. The work will continue, and we've got 50 to 70 years of hard work to be done. We can't anchor it to one or two people who happen to tap into what do you call that? They tap into an underlying sentiment, or like you look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, she's with her arm flailing and screwed up face, like, shame on you and all this. Yeah, what she's saying I basically agree with, but it's not helpful the way she's doing it. See, she's exactly the kind of person to condemn everybody equally, when there are, oil giants need to be condemned they need to eat 99.9% of the blame, because people like you and me, we're just driving around doing our job, for heaven's sakes. We can't stay up at night and worry about the climate and how are we going to make over the economy. It's not our problem. It's just not. So, quit screwing your face up and getting all pissed off at everybody else. So there was a little bit too much of that personality thing. I just like too much praise, too much creature worship. I don't know. So that's really the only thing that I would really fault about the book. Otherwise, I think it was extremely intelligently written and researched. He's got his heart in the right place. I mean, he was very balanced, even though he's extremely partisan on the environment. So let me know what you think of all this in the comments, guys. Let me know what you think of this whole format with me driving around and talking about what I'm listening to, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.